Hello all, welcome to another session of this given particular JavaScript. So in this session, let's focus upon very important things. So in the previous session, we have seen this one very important thing, which is known as this uh, one basic thing, which is known as this arrow functions. We have seen about this function expressions and arrow functions. So in this session, let me close all of it. Let me create this MD file. I'll say notes.md recap, where you can say in previous session. Let me keep it like this. In previous session, we have seen how can we write functions in different types in JavaScript. So in this respective session, let's focus on understanding about how about objects. So this would be, sorry, this is a recap. So I can say today's session, let's focus on understanding about objects. Like what are objects? Sorry, what are objects? Give me a minute. Yeah. What are objects? Uh, Fine. Give me a minute. Yeah. What are objects? What's the use case? Or I can say, what does these help us to write better JS code? Let's try to understand these two important things in this respective session. And furthermore, we'll see this entire next few other videos on only understanding about objects, because this is one of the fundamental and very important thing in JavaScript world. Whenever you're coding in JavaScript, one very important thing we need to clearly understand is that we should be definitely understanding about the internals of object, because if you clearly understand this objects very internally, and if you understand them in a fundamental level, at a fundamental level, this would really help you to understand complex code. This would really help you to write very complex code. So for that, let me do this one thing. Let me create a file known as object.js. Now let's write a basic code. So first of all, let's try to understand what is meant by object. So as we know, we have seen what are the different data types that are present inside respective JavaScript. There are around 8 data types that we found out, right? Specifically, instead of directly going to the definition of this respective object, let's do one thing. Let's try to understand that. Let's have some small recap of understanding what are the different data types that we have in this particular JavaScript. We found out that there are 8. So which is a number, sorry, a number, where this includes begint, or let me keep it as begint as separate. Begint, string, boolean, we have null, undefined. So total we have 6 as of such things. We have symbol, and finally we have object. So there are total number of 8 different data types that are present in JavaScript language. Now 7 of them, the first 7 of them, number, begin, string, boolean, null, undefined, and string and symbol, sorry, all these 7 are called as primitive data types. Primitive data types, because I need to give this definition. What is meant by primitive data type? Primitive data type. So to better understand this given particular primitive data type, we can clearly say that their values can contain only a single thing, which means be it a string or number or whatever. This is what meant by primitive data type. But in contrast, we have this eighth data type, which is actually known as object, which is object. So here, objects are actually used to store keyed collections. Keyed collections, yeah. Objects are exactly used to store keyed collections So in this respective format, if you can clearly observe, the thing is, oh, yeah, sorry, let's get back to this given particular thing. Now, one very important thing we need to understand is, yeah, that objects are actually used to store keyed collections of, let me keep it, of uh, various data and more complex entities. So in JavaScript, what we can say is like objects can penetrate almost every aspect of the language. So we must understand them first before understanding some complex part of this respective JavaScript altogether. So one very important thing we can use is an object can be created using your flavor braces. Your flavor braces can be created using flavor braces with an optional list of properties. Now, there are two key definitions we need to understand. One is nothing but property and key. Property. So, what is meant by property? Um, it is a key value pair. We can say it is a key value pair. It is a key value pair where key is a string, or the other ways we can keep this as also called as, or this key is also called as property name. Property name, where uh, and value can be any data type, like anything, to be more precise, anything. So give me a minute. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Now, what is this given particular key value pair inside a respect to object altogether? So where we can say that, let's say, let's try to create some sample kind of an object. I'll say let um, obj is equal to something like empty braces, like this. So here we have created an empty object with no properties inside. No properties inside. So one very important thing we need to understand is, here in the definition, as I've mentioned, an object can be created using these flavor brackets with an optional list of properties. So whenever you're creating an object like this, we can keep properties inside these flower braces. So what is meant by property? It is a key value pair. If you can clearly remember, the definition of the property is key value pair. So object does consist of properties. Even though we can create empty objects like this with zero properties, but still the basic thing that we actually go ahead is nothing but we'll create objects specifically uh, to have this list of properties, where having properties inside an object is always your choice. So this is one how where we can do it. So this actually, let me name it. So here or below, the object or empty object is being created. One very important thing I need to mention: empty object is being created using a syntax known as, give me a minute, uh, object literal. Object literal. So whenever you are using flower braces to create an object, and you're storing inside a variable known as obj. So this part, whenever you're using flower braces to create an object, is actually known as, we are creating object using a syntax named as object literal. So here the object is being created using a syntax known as object literal. This is the first important thing. Second important thing, I can say let obj1 is equal to, I can also create an object using the syntax known as a new object. So here object is being created using constructor syntax. I can say object constructor syntax. So in this case, I am also creating an object I'm also creating an object and storing inside a variable known as obj1. So to create an object, there are two different ways: using flower brackets, using this constructor function. So this whatever thing that I've highlighted, the object with green color, which is in green color, this is actually known as constructor function. This is known as constructor function. So what are these constructor functions? How can we have this given particular constructor function is altogether a different thing. But as we try to understand, how can we also can create a customized constructor functions like this in further sessions altogether. But now let's focus upon this given particular thing known as an object. So this is how we can create an object using a flower braces and using a constructor function. So using flower braces, we have created an object and stored inside obj, a variable named as obj. Same thing using constructor function, we have created an object and stored it inside a variable known as obj1. Now let's try to understand uh, what I can say. Yeah, instead of creating empty object, let's try to create some kind of a meaningful objects. So for example, if I want to store a user's details, like this, sorry, like if I want to store a user's details like name, age, marriage status. Previously, I used to do like this. Let name is equal to something like Nathan, or we can take any something like Akhil. Let age is equal to some 25. Let married marriage status is equal to something like false. If you can clearly observe, if I want to store for a single user named Akhil, his age and his marriage status, I need to be creating these respective three different three different variables altogether. But if I can clearly say, or if I can create an object like let user is equal to, I can keep all of them as a key valued pair inside this given particular flower braces, which are known as properties. So I'll say name and I'll mention Akhil. And we have to say age to be 25, marriage uh, status is false. Is false. So instead of creating three different variables, what we have did, we have simply created all these properties. If you can clearly remember, the definition of property, it is a key value pair. It is a key value pair where key is property name. So always remember the left hand side is property name. Left hand side is property name. Right hand side is value. Which is nothing but left hand side is key, right hand side is value. Key value pair. So this entire thing is one single pair where one key has one value. One key has one value. This is all about this given particular thing known as properties. So whatever properties that you want to give, you can mention them like this. And one, remember, after one key value pair or one property is done, we have to keep a comma. We have to keep a comma. Do not keep a semicolon. It will say it is an end of the line. But here, apart from this given particular name, we also have age and marriage status that are being present for us. So one very important thing we need to understand is we have name, age, and marriage status. All these respective examples present within us, present within this given particular, one single object altogether. So these all are properties, where a property consists of a key, which is the left hand side, and a value on the right hand side altogether. So here the first property is name, and the second, the value of this first, here the first property is name Akhil, second property is age 25, third property is marriage status. And another very important thing we need to understand is first key is name, first value is Akhil, second key is age, second value is 25, third key is marriage status, and third value is nothing but false. So a property is a key value pair, and we write the property in this pattern. Clear? Clear with this given point? Right. Now, the important thing is, for example, in the previous thing, I have given, I have declared, I have initialized three different variables: name, age, and marriage status. But when I keep them as properties inside an object, when I keep them as a properties inside an object, how can I access them? So for example, let me say I have this thing known as a name. I have this thing known as an Akhil. Now, if I want to use this same variable name inside a string, I'll simply say console.log. I'll simply mention name. Okay, name. Instead of giving a normal name, like username. Username is the person as our first user, for example. Right. So now one very important thing. Previously we have created these kind of things like let age is equal to 25, let marriage status is equal to false. So we have these three different variables. If you want to use them, you can use them like this. You can simply use them like this. But whenever we have a property, whenever we have an object like this, where inside we have a property like this, name, Akhil, age 25, marriage status false. How can we access these properties? How can we access these properties? This is a fundamental point. So, oh, sorry. So in that given particular case, I'll simply say console.log. Now, one very important thing we need to understand is before writing this console log, to access the properties in a object, specifically in an object, we can do it in two ways. First way is using dot notation. Second one is square brackets notation. We can either use dot notation or we can either use square bracket notation. Let's try to understand what is meant by dot notation. So when are you trying to use dot notation? So I'll keep it like this. So I'll say first I'll write object name, then I'll keep a dot. Now inside when I kept a dot, you can clearly see all these properties that I have defined inside this respective object named as user. Whenever I have this given particular thing known as a dot, we have age, marriage status and name. I can click on name or I'll simply say name. I can write it as name. Is our first user. So now even if you run the code, let me run the code. I'll simply say right. Now I can clearly see in the space of user.name, we have the output as Akhil. We have the output as Akhil. So if you want to access properties instead of property, you can access this with respect to properties in a given particular object. We can use dot notation where we make or we write this respective users or object name on the left hand side, and we have this dot, and whatever property you want to access, you just mention it as name. That's it. And one very important thing we need to understand is at a given point of time, we can only access one single property or one single value using a key. So here in this given particular point, at this given particular point, for a given particular user object, we are exactly using or we are exactly accessing one single property or one single property named as name or one single key known as name. If I want to access name and age, I cannot do like this. I'll say dot age. I cannot do like this. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. So how does this given particular dot notation actually work? Let's try to understand that thing a bit more. Whenever you say, whenever you write an object name and you mention dot, you can clearly see under this object we have different properties. Under this object we have different properties. So JavaScript interpreter, what it does understand is whenever you write something and you kept a dot, then it understand whatever things that are present before the dot, whatever things that are present before the dot. Here in this case it is user. It assumes it as an object. it assumes it as an object. So here, after us writing this respective dot, the left hand side of the dot is something known as user. Now according to the JavaScript, it already stored a object, this entire object into a variable known as user. So according to the JavaScript interpreter, this user itself is a object for it. So then it prompts this given particular thing. You can clearly see I'm just hovering on this given particular user, and you can clearly see that what are the properties that are defined under in the object, that are visible here. Now what if I do, like, even if I say user.name, it is completely fine because there is a name property that is present inside user, so we'll get the name. If I again keep as dot, now JavaScript interpreter understand, okay, we got a new dot, but before the dot, what is it? It is something known as name. Now it checks that whether this name is actually a object or not. If you can clearly see, I'm hovering on this given particular name, it is showing me that name is string. And this given particular thing, after adding this given particular dot before this name, this checking happens where JavaScript itself does one important thing. So when it checks something other than object, it's something like string, it will give us an error. That's why I'm not adding something like age. This is one very important thing. We need to clearly understand it. At a given point of time, we can access using dot method. We can access only one single thing because dot works in that given particular pattern. Right. So another very important thing we need to understand is, here we have created, let me have all of it together. Right. Now, suppose if a given particular user's age needs to be updated, I can simply do it at user.age is equal to something like 27. I can easily do that thing. It's a very simple change. User.age. Now, if I console.log user.age, it will not be 25 because here for this given particular age property, we have changed the value to 27. Now I can clearly see the output is 27. The output for this given particular line is 27. Yeah, that's great. Now let me comment. Oh, sorry. Right. So here we can modify the users, not users, no, values for a property. In an object. Values of a property in this respective thing known as an object thing altogether. This is then we can actually do. If you want to delete, for example, delete a property, then we'll say delete user.age. Now after this thing executes, we can simply say just user. One very important thing I need to mention, we can also print entire object instead of printing only respective properties. Instead of accessing respective properties and printing them, if you mention only the object name, entire object will be print. So here I am deleting this age property from the user's object. From the user's object, I am actually deleting the age property. So let's run the code. Now if you can clearly observe, here deletion operation is actually done. After deletion operation, I just want to see what are the different properties that are present inside the user object. Now you can clearly see there are two properties, name and marriage status. Similarly, let me keep it like this. If you want to add new property to the object, we can use dot notation, or we can use dot notation, or the square notation also is fine. So for example, in our given particular output that we just saw, our object has only two properties, name and marriage status. What if we try to add a new property named as pin code? If I want to do it, I'll mention my object and I'll try to write pin code is actually equal to something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to add a new property, because if till now, because we have just deleted age property from our object, and we can clearly observe that we have these things, only two properties, name and marriage status. So similarly, if you want to add a new property to the object, we can use this dot notation. So I have mentioned my object at dot, and I have mentioned what is the new property that I want to include. I mentioned its name. I mentioned its key. To be more precise, I mentioned its key. The key should be pin code, and the value it should store is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, after this thing, console.log, I'll simply say user. Right. Now, if you can clearly observe in the output, we have name property, age property, marriage status, and we have this pin code. We have this respective pin code. We have this respective pin code altogether. So a new property has been added. A new property has been added. So mention your name, mention the object, mention the key, and on the right hand side, mention the value that you want to store inside that given particular new key, pin code. So that's what we are actually here doing it. This is how we can add new properties into respective given particular thing. So then sometimes some people might also include this thing as a thing. Let's say here, if you can clearly observe in our respective users object, name, age, marriage status, all these are single word, to be more precise, single word properties. But marriage status is bit not single word property, it's a multi-word property altogether. But what if we try to add this one very important thing? I'll say like birds, and I'll say false, and I'll say false. Now in this case, let's say this is a classic interview question. Let's say they're given you an object like this. You clearly know how to access name, age, and marriage status. But whenever you have this key like this in a property, whenever you have key like this, like space and birds. Now if I want to access it, if I simply say user dot like space birds, BRIDS, you can clearly see VS Code itself is showing that this is an error. It is clearly mentioning an identifier expected. So even though the key that is present inside this given particular object is same as this, but why does this given particular property is not being received? Because one very important thing we need to understand is dot notation has a I can say has a block while dealing to access the properties or access the multi-word words property. So whenever you're using dot notation, if you have this multi-word, you can clearly see like, space, and birds. There are around two different words, and there is a space in between two different words. Whenever we have this given particular thing, your dot notation doesn't care about it. Because dot notation enables, or dot notation is enabled, has no way while dealing to access multi-words properties. Instead, what it do is we can use square notations or the square brackets notation. Square bracket notation. So instead of writing like that, you can simply use user square brackets and you will mention like birds. So let me write it in console.log. Sorry. Like this. Now, if I console log, if I run the code, you can clearly see now we'll be able to access this property. So using this given particular key, we can access its value. Using this given particular key, we can access this value. So I have using my object where this is a property or this is a key. Using this key, I can access this values. That's what I have did. This is how square bracket notation is actually being invented in JavaScript thing altogether, in JavaScript thing altogether. But one very interesting thing I want to mention is, if you can clearly observe, as I have mentioned in the first line, where objects are used to store keyed collections of various data and more complex entities. You can clearly observe here, we are storing a string, we are storing a number, we are storing a boolean. So at a given particular point of time, object, using this given particular flower brackets, whatever we are creating, this object has this ability to store multiple data types at a given point of time. But if you can clearly observe in this given particular example, at this thing, username is equal to Akhil, where here Akhil is one string type where it is being stored in a username variable. But if you can clearly observe, at this point, I am unable to store multiple values. Yeah, you cannot say Akhil, comma 25 or 23 to be stored. If I do this thing, let me think. If I try to store Akhil and comma with 23, a different two different data types at the same point of time in a given particular variable, they collide with each other, because as primitive data types, their values can contain only single thing. Either you store Akhil or either you store 23. This is data types conditions. This is data type conditions. So I can either choose Akhil or I can choose 23 altogether. But if you can clearly observe here, we are storing string, number, boolean things altogether at the same point of time inside an object. Inside an object. So I have created an object using object literal syntax or flower bracket syntax. And I'm storing this given particular object in this given particular user. But that's not exactly the thing. This is how the object creation actually happens. But internally, if you go, it is much tough to understand this given particular. I mean, it's much deep on how objects store internally inside your memory and your computer. That's very a different thing altogether. That's a very a different thing altogether. Let me write. So this is how we'll be able to convert or no store the respective object thing into our respective thing into our elements. Now another one very important thing we need to understand is, if in a object, or let's say we can keep it like this, if we try to access a object, or if you try to access a property using its key, which doesn't exist which doesn't exist in that object, then output would be undefined. So I'll be simply saying, for example, here we have our user name, age, marriage status, like birds, and also we are trying to add a new property named as new property with the key as pin code and with the value of 12345. So if I try to want to access something like console.log user.is admin, because if you can clearly observe, our object has only 5 properties: name, age, marriage status, like birds, and the pin code where we have added. But there is no property known as user admin. If you have any doubts, I just hover on my object user and you can clearly see. Under the user, I have name, age, marriage status, like birds initially. But in the middle, I'm also creating a new property named as pin code. Now, in this given particular case, when I am trying to access this one single uh, property or one single key which is not at all present inside the object, then you'll clearly observe this one thing. I can clearly see whenever I'm trying to access, which is a non-existent property, you'll see the output as undefined. You'll see this respective output as undefined. So this is another important thing I want to mention. Now, now coming back to this another thing, we have this one single element known as computed properties. It's a very interesting thing, but let's try to learn about it. Computed properties. So what is meant by computed properties is nothing but we can use square brackets in an object literal. So what is meant by an object literal? This creating an object using the flower basis. But While creating an object like this, we can actually use these square brackets inside object literal. Inside object literal, this is called computed properties. This is called computed properties. For example, let me take a simple example. Let's say let fruit is equal to some apple. I'll say let bag. Let me create a new object known as bag using this flower basis. And I will say fruit to be 5. Fruit to be 5. So here we have created a property where the key would be replaced with this thing known as an apple. The key would be replaced with thing known as apple. Key would be apple and value would be 5. For this property, the key would be this apple. Here instead of fruit, this apple will be replaced. This apple will be replaced. If you have any kind of doubt, let me do it. Console.log. I'll say, sorry, not fruit, bag dot apple. Let me do it. So run. You can clearly see bag dot apple. The output is 5. See, the output is 5, and we are actually storing 5 inside of this respective thing. So the meaning of this computed property is simple. So here, this entire thing, the key that we are actually seeing, braces, which inside that we have something known as fruit, means that the property name should be taken. Let me write. That's a very important thing. Hmm. I'll say the name of, I can say, um, of the name of the property is taken from the variable fruit. Variable fruit, or is taken instead of is taken, should be taken. This is a correct way of writing it. So, for example, if a visitor enters apple, when visitor enters apple, like this apple, the bag will actually become apple of this given particular thing. For example, let's say if I'm taking input here, I have inside the fruit, I am taking this respective thing known as uh, a static value. I'm storing this apple here. For example, if I write it as prompt and I'll say something known as which fruit to buy. And as a default option, I'll give apple. So here using prompt, we are asking users this question and asking whether he's okay to take apple or not. If not apple, he'll enter some value, orange or some other thing. Once they enter this value, that needs to be, once they enter this given particular value, then automatically, let me write a multi-line comment. Automatically, the bag object, bag object should be looking like this. Let's say if they entered something known as oranges instead of thing, it's known as 5. So once user, for example, there is a big screen and user just goes there and there is a question popped out, which fruit do you want to buy? He just clicked on oranges. Then inside, after user preference, I want to create this given particular thing. I want to create a element like this, not like this. I want to create a variable known as bag where I'm actually carrying out all the different choices that user make. So this is how I want to do. That's why I have used this given particular thing now in computed properties. Based upon user selection, I want to create object there and then itself, and I want to not to showcase this object directly to the user, but in to process the payment process and other processes altogether. I am storing this thing, this oranges here inside an object like this because users can buy multiple fruits. They can buy apples, oranges, pears, any such kind of a fruit, any such kind of fruit they can buy. So that's why we have been using this given particular computed properties altogether. Computed properties altogether. So this is how we can actually do this given particular thing. And another one very important thing I just want to mention is that The property name limitations. As we have already seen that while giving the key names, this key names, you should not use any keywords. You should not use for, you should not use let. I can say if I go there, I'll say let is equal to 67. This is a bad practice to write. This is a bad practice because let is a keyword. Instead, if I say something known as function, I shouldn't be using these words. If someone write it like this, because you can clearly observe this object constructor is itself a keyword. So you should not be using that given particular keyword altogether, right? So this is how we actually don't use our respective keywords. That's a property name limitations that I actually want to mention. And also, um, whenever you mention numbers like something like zero and I'll say uh, one, two, three, if this respective key itself having a number, then our respective object will convert this number into string. So this will here on the left hand side, the key will be stored as like this. The key is this, not a simple zero, but a string zero, a string formatted zero, a string formatted zero. So this is about the respective thing known as an objects thing. Now, one very important thing at the end I just want to mention is that let me keep it like this. Let me write it instead of writing this thing. Let me. Mm, so maybe we can right. So if you want, for example, if you want to check, um, if you want to check if a property with such key name, with such a key name is available in the object or not, we have in operator. In operator. So this in operator helps us to check property existence altogether. Property existence altogether. So I'll simply say here we have users object, right? User object, name, age, surname. Here, if you can clearly observe in this above object, we don't have surname property. A property doesn't sound surname. We have property name, age. I mean, property with the key names, age, name, age, marriage status, like bird, zero. But we don't have a property with a key named as surname. So I'll say surname in user. So this actually checks the thing. Instead, I'll simply console log it. Wait. Okay, sorry. I need to forget to this. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me. My bad. Let me do it. Now I can clearly observe it is false. It is clearly observable. Now it is false because there is no such thing known as a property named as surname in user. But we have this property named as zero. True. You can see the value is true because in the user property, in the user object, we have a property named as zero. That's how we have this given particular thing as in. So this is about the respective thing known as an in. So the one fundamental property, why does this given particular in property helps us to find out is, I can say, um, there is this case where this in operator helps us to find this one fundamental thing, whether I could say, yeah, whether the key name is storing undefined or not, undefined or not. This is one very important thing. So whenever we are using in, this property, sorry, this property, if you can clear, this property will be compared with undefined, like, which is nothing but if this given particular thing will be written as a statement like this, as a condition like this, double equal to undefined. To be more precise, user dot this, this entire thing will be compared. If this is equal to undefined, then it will simply mention as return undefined or return false, sorry, return false. If this respective thing is not the case, then it will return true, which is nothing but here, for a given particular object, we are actually checking whether this property is present or not. As we have already seen, in a given particular object, if there is no such kind of a property, here we have already tried with some other example, ezmin, ezmin, because ezmin is not such kind of a property. The output for this given particular line is undefined, is undefined. So that kind of a comparison actually happens in this given particular thing. So it has this condition, a condition that's where this thing actually works out. Right. Now, coming back to this respective thing, let me close it off. Let me count it down. There is this one thing known as an for in loop. There is this for thing known as for in loop. So we have for loop that we have studied, but if you want to run a loop on an object, then we can mm, use this for in loop. For in loop, it is simply, it is super easy to do it. The syntax would simply be like this. The syntax would look like this. I'll say for we mentioned key in object, and we'll write the loop body. A loop body, or we'll write some code. So for example, we have an object known as user. If I want to print all of these properties, I'll simply mention it like this. For let key in user. Sorry. So here we have this given particular simple variable where we can use this simple variable and run a loop on this user. I'll simply say console.log key, console.log key, right? So for example, let me run the code node. I can clearly see we have these respective things: 0, name, age, marriage status, like birds, and pin code. So you can use any other thing. Let I. Even when I are writing for loop, we are using this something known as a variable, a sample variable known as a sample variable. We can use that thing. So this one single thing will go to each and everything. Will go to each and everything here, and we'll get the details for us. We'll get the details for us. Even if you want, you can run the code. You'll see it. So this variable, sample variable, will go to this given particular object and will run will go to each and every property, and we can have this given particular names of the property. We can have this names of the property altogether. So this is how this entire for in loop will actually be utilized. So That's it for this respective session. So we'll meet in the next session. Until then, thank you and bye bye. So this for and loop is very much useful. Just focus and understand how can we use this given particular for and loop as we go forward. Try it out more of this given particular for and loop altogether. Right? That's it for this session. Thank you all.